Bring your closer. Oh, my head hurts. Okay. Yeah, be right back.
Finally, the detective at least considers the facts that Ryan might be in some form of physical distress. He leaves the room to ask for an ambulance and returns momentarily to try and get a few more details about the shooting. Ryan clarifies that Heather isn't related to Richie or his dad, and that he's got no idea why they attacked him that evening. 10 minutes later, the fire department arrives to take a look at Ryan's injury.
And he's acting like he has a serious head injury, which would make sense.
But you guys confirm
Ryan.
Yeah, we'll take him.
I don't know why.
We can tell. Did that all? Has it been like that before, or it just happened tonight?
Like this for like a day or so.
So it happened, what, the other night?
I don't know.
You don't know what happened? Were there guns around?
This kid Eric did it. I don't know how he did it exactly. I might have been shot. I don't know.
Ryan gets his blood pressure taken, and finally, after 56 minutes of unnecessary and ultimately deadly interrogation, he's taken to the hospital. Upon inspection at the hospital, doctors immediately realized his status was critical and that he also had indeed been shot in the eye. They also told his father that he'd contracted an infection that could have been prevented had he received proper care. Ryan stayed at the hospital for 35 days and lost part of his brain and his left eye. Worst of all, though, 5 days and lost part of his brain and his left eye. Worst of all, though, he experienced regular seizures from the day he left the hospital until 2016, when one finally took his life. Richie and Larry were both given life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ryan's father also sued the police department, but as is so often the case, he only received a fraction of the punishment, less than 3 years in prison. Many people believe this officer should be charged with assault and possibly even murder, and that 3 years is absolutely not enough, especially compared to cases like Reed Durans, who's facing up to 30 years in prison after attacking a cop. Reed was arrested at an elementary school after he was seen pretending to be the father of a kindergartner. Reed was seen to be acting strangely around the kids and failed to correctly name any of the children there, so he was arrested and taken to the police station. In the interrogation, Reed freely told officers that he intended to lure one of the children out, feed them candy laced with tranquilizers, then abduct them while they were unconscious. But after what seemed like an easy interrogation, Reed suddenly decided that the detective had heard enough and made a bid for his escape. Correctly name any of those years is absolutely not enough, especially compared to cases like Reed Durans, who's facing up to 30 years in prison after attacking a cop. Reed was arrested at an elementary school after he was seen pretending to be the father of a kindergartner. Reed was seen to be acting strangely around the kids and failed to correctly name any of the children there, so he was arrested and taken to the police station. In the interrogation, Reed freely told officers that he intended to lure one of the children out, feed them candy laced with tranquilizers, then abduct them while they were unconscious. But after what seemed like an easy interrogation, Reed suddenly decided that the detective had heard enough and made a bid for his escape. Enough and made a bid for his escape.
Put your hands behind your back now. You kidding me right now?
Reed had picked up a pen and attempted to stab the officer with it, but the officer's reflexes and composure helped him to instantly take him down and restrain him. That, and the fact that the pen isn't the most effective weapon. Either way, Reed was arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping, and now a felony count of assault. He's currently awaiting trial and facing up to 30 years in prison. Reed's escape obviously didn't end very well for him, but the story is different for Quantrell Schwartzlow, who managed to escape the cops faster than anyone in history. Quantrell was brought in for strangling a girl and assaulting her, a crime he clearly didn't want to be convicted of.
Oh, no.
Unfortunately for Quantrell, his handcuffs were a dead giveaway, and he was captured 4 hours later. While it's unknown exactly what happens to Quantrell after, this clip will forever put him in the Interrogation Hall of Fame. However, Ricky Hawthorne took a much more straightforward approach to ending his interrogation, managing to confess in record time. Ricky was found covered in blood near the bodies of Lara Kuchar and Tommy Skeens. Lara had clearly been assaulted. Ricky's DNA was also found at the scene, so police had no worries when bringing him in. Surprisingly though, Ricky would make it even easier for them.
Hey, come on in.
Hey, listen.
Yeah, I did. I did.
You know what? Let's do this.
I did, but I think somebody came behind me and finished it.
Okay.
Yeah, I did.
So much for staying silent. However, Ricky is alleging that he wasn't actually the murderer. He just attacked the couple and assaulted Laura. It was someone else that
Came in behind me and finished them off. I did beat the shit out of him, but it was somebody else. I'll let
of these two evil teen killers, suspected of murdering their best friend for nothing more than their own joy.
I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a f***ing joke. Oh.
These two 16-year-olds are currently suspected of stabbing classmate Cassie Stoddard over 30 times in one of the most horrifying murders in history. But what they don't realize is that in the next couple hours, police are going to dismantle every part of their story in front of their own eyes, resulting in one of the most satisfying and intense interrogations of all time, where these teens will soon realize their actions have consequences. At 11:02 p.m., 16-year-old Cassie had been left home alone to take care of her aunt's house while she was away. That night, she invited over 3 people, her boyfriend Matt and his friends Brian and Tori. Halfway into the night, Brian and Tori left, leaving just Matt and Cassie in the house. Soon after, the lights in the house started to turn on and off, with strange, loud noises coming from the basement. An hour later, Matt headed home, leaving Cassie alone and terrified. As soon as Matt had left, the lights turned off again, a door slammed viciously behind her back, and 2 masked figures, dressed in all black, burst into the living room. Before Cassie even knew what was happening, she had been brutally stabbed to death and left on the living room floor. With barely any leads, the police were left wondering who could have committed such a horrifying crime. Eventually, they decided to bring in the 2 boys who visited Cassie on the night of the murder, and 2 of the most disturbing interrogations of all time began.
Hey, Brian. Hey, here we go. We talked to your folks, and we just kind of told them they're filled in, and they're comfortable with the fact that we'll sit down and kind of, the other night we hashed over some things about, where you were and all the details and stuff. I want to remind you that, of course, you're not under arrest, okay? You're free to leave. And if you don't have to answer any questions that you don't want to, and at any time you can walk out that door and go hook up with your parents, okay? So we're not making you stay here for any reason.
Both boys were questioned a couple days earlier and provided the same alibi. After leaving Cassie's house, they both headed to a nearby movie theater and stayed there for the rest of the night. Though the cops found it curious that neither of the boys were actually able to tell them what the movie was about. But given this is the only reason they have to suspect the boys, they decided to bring them in individually without arresting them, creating a comfortable atmosphere that wouldn't scare them away.
We're going to start about, I know we talked the other night about, first of all, why we're here, and we're investigating homicide.
Yes.
That Cassie Stoddard was murdered.
Yes.
And because of the fact that you were, one of the last 3 people, there, and you had knowledge of her and stuff like that, it's common course that we want to go and interview people and find out what you know.
Regardless of the fact that neither of the boys had been arrested, it's important to remember that, guilty or innocent, the best course of action here is always to call a lawyer. Now that the detectives have confirmed they're there regarding the murder, they have to assume they're suspects, which in turn means all the cops are going to try to do is obtain information and try to extract a confession. A lawyer would be able to help spot traps set by the detectives that will be used against them further in the interrogation. Traps such as the very next question asked.
Let's talk about Friday, and I think the date was the 22nd, and that was the night that you guys went up there to visit. Can you tell me a little bit about maybe at school or something, how you learned or how you come to go up to Cassie's place or out to that place she was house sitting?
She told me on Thursday that she was having babysitting the house, basically. House sitting.
Okay, so you guys decided to go, plans are made. It's Friday. What time do you get ready? What time do you end up? How does it work out that you and Brian head out to?
What time did I leave from our house?
On
Friday.
It was after I got back from taking Jamie to the game.
It was about 6:30 or 7.
Yeah, 6:30ish.
About there.
Okay, between 6:30 and 7.
Yeah.
You left your house.
Yeah, and I went and picked up
Almost
Brian.
7. Probably, between 6:30 and 7.
Okay.
The detective is trying to establish a timeline of events here that he will refer back to for the rest of the interrogation. If Tori is guilty, something he says here will be a lie, meaning that if he's pressured for long enough, he's bound to say something that will conflict with his initial statement, giving the detective a way in. But this particular case also carries an interesting dynamic. There are 2 suspects being interrogated back to back. Given that they're separated, this means that their stories will have to be identical, or else the cops will have an instant tell that at least one of them is lying. This is a technique the detectives use multiple times in this case and will eventually prove to tear the case wide open.
So you arrived there. What happened when you get there?
Cassie and Matt gave us a tour of the entire house.
Just back up just a little.